Please welcome to the stage Speaker of the House Tina Kotek and OBC Housing Task Force Chair Cort O'Haver.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Cort O'Haver, President and CEO. I'm going to move up here so I can see you.
There.
President and CEO of Umpqua Bank, and I couldn't be more pleased today than to introduce the House Speaker, Tina Kotek. Just a little background about Tina real quick, and then we'll talk about housing and affordability and homelessness. So Tina has represented House District 44 in North and Northeast Portland since 2007. Was elected as the Speaker in 2013, has been the longest serving leader in the state of Oregon since that time. She's been instrumental in major legislation on transportation, schools, and so much more, and I'm just thrilled to be able to sit here for a few minutes and talk to her about housing. So we're here to talk about housing policy, and on a business perspective, I think there's two areas as a business leader where I think we're going to touch on. One is homelessness, which the governor just spoke about. We're in record expansionary times, and yet we still have 14,000 families that go without homes every evening. And second of all, housing affordability. As a business leader, the impact that has on my ability to grow and attract talent, and what the state and public sector or private sector are going to do long term is really important to me as a business leader. This last June, the Speaker was instrumental in passing some legislation which really put Oregon on the forefront of starting to solve this issue. And I know at Umpqua Bank, we spend over $100 million a year trying to invest in affordable housing projects, and yet clearly it's not enough. It's going to take a very robust partnership between the public and private sector. So we're going to ask the Speaker a few questions today and see if we can get to it, and I couldn't be more pleased to be able to be here with you. So, Madam Speaker, many Oregonians are in a category called cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Economists argue that prices are high in part because supply of housing hasn't kept up with the demand. Is that how you see the problem, and what can we do about it?
Well, thank you, Cort, and I want to say thank you to the Oregon Business Plan sponsors and organizers to put housing front and center today. Thank you, because I think it's a business issue. It's an economic issue. So the question of people's ability to pay for their housing has two parts. It's what people's income they bring to paying for their housing, and it's also what the cost of housing is. And that is a function of supply in a lot of places. We have more demand than the supply, and so the cost of housing has gone up. Our forecasters at the state have said we need to create 30,000 new units every year to keep up with the lack of supply. And the demand is up because people continue to move here because Oregon's a very livable place and they want to be here. So the equation doesn't really work. I think there's some misconceptions out there about who is experiencing homelessness. I think there's some sense that it's because of mental health issues or substance issues, but we have a lot of people who are living outside every night, who get up every morning and go to work. And they either can't afford or can't find a place to live except living out in a tent or in a village or in some other place. And that's not the kind of Oregon we want to have. So we do have to work on our supply. I was here 4 years ago in 2015 talking about this as an economic issue. And we have made great progress, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we have more to do. So again, I cannot overemphasize that this is a business issue. If we cannot recruit and retain people who work here because they don't have a place to live, then that's a problem for everybody in this room.
Excellent. So we hear an ongoing debate about the relationship between housing affordability and homelessness. To what extent are these crises related, and what steps did the legislature take to address the homeless crisis?
Thank you. So I touched a little bit on my first answer. There's a direct correlation between people experiencing homelessness and their inability to afford where they live. We talked about cost burden. That category talks about people who spend more than 30% of their income on their housing. Well, I can tell you there are thousands of Oregonians who are extremely cost burdened because they're paying more than half of their income on covering their housing costs. So I think it is important to make sure we understand who's having housing problems. It's not, there are people who are working, a lot of people are working who can't afford their housing. And what the state has stepped up to help. We had a particularly successful legislative session this year. We passed rent stabilization and no-cause eviction legislation to make sure unjust evictions weren't happening and there's more predictability in the rental market in terms of rents for people who rent. It was really important. People have been getting evicted and losing their housing because of unanticipated rent, major rent increases. We also have stepped up again in this current biennium to do more for the construction of affordable housing. $200 million in state bonding. It will go out in this biennium. $50 million for supportive housing construction, and another $150 million to create units for families. That's a very big investment in bonded debt that the state is taking on. We've also put $40 million towards preserving the existing affordable housing we have, because we don't want to lose that out of the marketplace, and another $15 million to preserve manufactured home parks across the state, because that is a significant part of affordable housing for some Oregonians. And lastly, we've done another $50 million this biennium for emergency housing assistance and shelter assistance to make sure local communities can help people who are on the verge of homelessness or are currently experiencing homelessness. So we feel like we are doing a lot, but it is not just about the money. It's also about what we do on the supply side as it relates to our land use system, and I know we're going to get into that.
Great. Excellent. Excellent. So let's talk about some recent legislation, House Bills 2001, 2003. So House Bill 2001, some call it the missing middle housing bill. What does it do, and how much of the affordability problem could it solve?
Well, House Bill 2001 is a law that, what we like to say, re-legalizes middle housing. Here in the state of Oregon, you have some very, very established neighborhoods that have this type of housing, from single-family detached homes to duplexes and triplexes and cottage cluster apartments. The bill, the law now, says we need to allow that in communities across the state. We believe that level of housing choice in every community of size in the state will help with affordability, as allow us also to grow in a sustainable fashion. So here's what the law does. If you are in a community greater than 10,000 people, and you are also a community in the metro area, you must allow duplexes to be constructed on lots that currently now allow only single-family detached homes. And if you're in the metro area and you are a community greater than 25,000, you have to allow in areas that allow single detached family homes, duplexes, triplexes, quads, cottage clusters, and townhouses. We must have more choice than just a single family detached home and a large multifamily apartment building. That type of choice will reduce cost. We have affordable housing developers who are excited about being able to put more types of homes on a plot of land, therefore reducing their construction costs, therefore reducing the cost of the housing. So it will create transformation over time. Over the next 2 decades, we will see more diversity, more choice, more ability for communities to grow in a sustainable fashion.
Excellent. So House Bill 2003 earned bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. In this day and age, how did that work?
Well, in the legislature, I like to think bipartisan support is you have your urban legislators, your suburban legislators, and your rural legislators thinking it's a good idea and working together to get it done. House Bill 2001 was one of those types of bills. And primarily because legislators around the state know that we have a housing crisis. The governor mentioned this is a statewide issue. So you have legislators very much aware of the issue and willing to work on it. Why we had bipartisan support also is we took the bill from introduced to final form in a very collaborative fashion. Legislators dug in and said, look, we want to make this happen. We need to have more acceptable timelines for our cities. We need to provide resources. We also have to have some adjustments if communities have legitimate infrastructure issues in terms of meeting it. So we did all those things, and we ended up having strong bipartisan support for the bill.
Great. So we're already seeing some pushback from some cities that may not want the density that these bills encourage. Housing debates are fierce at neighborhood levels. How do we ensure the bill's intent withstands local pressure?
Well, it is the law, so we're hoping, we look for our local governments to work with us in implementing the law. But we also took very seriously that we needed to provide resources for our local communities to actually make this change. Change is hard, it costs money, so the state stepped up and gave DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, opportunities to work with local cities. It is one of those things that we all have to get together to work on. Tigard, the city of Tigard, the city of Bend, they're ahead of the curve already. They are close to implementing all this right now. It is doable, but it will take time. It will take collaboration. We work with the League of Oregon Cities to try to understand the concerns of cities. So hopefully, as people understand that every community needs to do this so that it is a shared transformation, so every community is doing the same thing.
Great, excellent. So there are a lot of regulatory details to work out with House Bills 2001 and 2003, and it'll require bold leadership from both public and private sectors. As you look ahead, what can we do together to further address Oregon's need for affordable housing?
Great, thank you for the question, because we can't just look at everything we've done, and we've had great successes. We have to go forward. We're in it for the long haul. This is a crisis that took years to make and will take years to resolve, especially as the demand on our system continues to be very strong. So I always think there are a couple things you need to do. We have to fully implement what we passed, make sure the rulemaking is strong, and make sure we're actually understanding what we did and tracking how it gets implemented. We also have to make sure the things we've done in the past, are they still working? For example, we passed inclusionary zoning back in 2016. Is it working? Do we need to tweak it? We need to work with all of our partners. I look forward to working with our partners in the healthcare community, helping use healthcare dollars to keep people housed, to keep them healthy. Our education partners, the Student Success Act, with the additional resources for school counselors and social workers, working with families to help them get resources to stay housed, because every time a student moves during the school year, it causes disruption in their learning. We also want to make sure that we can, as a state, step up where the federal government continues to, lag behind. We're a small state, but we have big issues. So there's a lot of conversation right now about a state-funded rental voucher program to make up for the gap between income and housing cost. How would we do that? How much would it cost? So we, as a state, I believe, can step up and do that. I want to close with a couple points. We have to solve the housing problems across the continuum. It's not just about very, very low income subsidized housing for people who really need it because they are on fixed incomes. It's also about people who need to buy their first home. The entire housing continuum has to work, and right now it's not working very well. So at the state, we are working very hard to hit every part of the continuum to make the entire housing continuum to work, and we need private partnership to do that. The last thing I will say is, and people have said it today, we're in an economic good spot here in the state. We cannot lose momentum on what we're doing around housing. It is a crisis. It is continuing to be a crisis statewide. And if we have a downturn in the economy and we take the foot off the pedal, we will be in worse shape. We have to keep the momentum going while the economy is good. And if things slow down, continue to invest, continue to provide housing, and continue to help our most vulnerable Oregonians have what they need.
Excellent. So we were standing backstage right before we walked out, and we made a commitment to get together after, and Tina asked me, what does the business community think, or what are they focused on relative to both affordability and homelessness? And I know I've only recently, last year and a half, gotten involved in the affordability side. And I'll tell you, this is from my perspective, and this is probably for the business leaders. The first thing is be aware that the affordability issue leads to homelessness. And I was able to, because I'm the CEO, pull up our lowest paid employees, and they're good jobs, and look at how much money they make from Umpqua Bank on an annual basis and cross-reference that to the zip codes in which they live, and then look at what is a medium or low-priced cost of rent for those associates. And I can tell you I was surprised at, as the CEO of a fairly large employer, how many of my employees are considered cost burden or episodically homeless. And to Tina's point, we are in an expansion type economy, and what if something happens to those? So I think awareness on behalf of the business community and working with our public partners is a problem that will only be solved between you and I and other business leaders in Salem. So I welcome the opportunity to work with you. And if you're a business leader, please, understand there's a huge link there. And I can guarantee you today, unfortunately, you probably have an issue, and we need to address it as a business community. Great. Thank you. So I think we're out of time. Great. Thanks so much.
I think I guess we're.
Oh, I guess we go.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.